Good afternoon. Fabian Blosch, Executive Director of the Chiefs of Police Association. We are all here today, gathered law enforcement personnel, and our purpose here today is to support Governor Edwards' veto of the concealed carry bill, Senate Bill 118, which would allow people to carry a firearm concealed on their person without any kind of education or permit whatsoever. We are not opposed to concealed carry. We're opposed to concealed carry without education and knowledge of when, where, why, and how you can use this firearm, and that you are proficient in the firearm. That's our purpose here today. Numerous persons will come up and speak and express their concerns about that bill and why we feel the governor is correct in vetoing it. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. I'm Sheriff Marlin Gusman from New Orleans, and as Mr. Blosch said, we're all united. This concealed carry law was not well thought out, and whether you're from the north or the south of Louisiana or central Louisiana, it's important that we have a law that works. This law does not work. This law does not have the basic requirement that you have to have the training. Look, law enforcement officers have training. They have a post requirement, and there's still things that go wrong sometimes. Without the proper training, this law shouldn't be allowed to become a law, and the governor's veto should stand. And I know, especially in New Orleans, where gun violence has been a major problem, this is going to take away one of the main tools that the superintendent of police has in reducing gun violence. And he's going to come up here later and talk about that. But this is a critical time. We can't let gun violence take over, and this law cannot become a law. So thank you all for being here, and now I'll call Sheriff Craig Webre.
Good afternoon. My name is Craig Webre. I'm the Sheriff of Lafourche Parish. I want to acknowledge all of the law enforcement representatives that are here today in support of Governor Edwards and his veto of Senate Bill 118. Senate Bill 118 is really a solution in search of a problem. In 1996, the legislature enacted a concealed carry permitting process. And since that time, the process has been tweaked. It has a rigorous training component. And let me talk about that training component. It's not just how to shoot a gun. More importantly, it focuses on the safe handling of a firearm. It focuses on the proper storage of a firearm. It focuses on the opportunities when a firearm may be carried and may not be carried, on the liability associated with concealed carry and the use of a firearm, as well as the laws governing justifiable force or deadly force. So the training is an essential component. We have been providing that training in Lafourche Parish since the inception of the law. We allow private trainers to come to our pistol range and train people. Overwhelmingly, the response that the trainers get from the individuals who take the course is that they are very pleased to have had that opportunity. Now, you have a variety of people who show up. There are people who are very proficient in firearms, and there are people who have never held a handgun in their life. As a professional law enforcement officer, and these gentlemen and ladies can tell you as well, the dynamics of a handgun are far more complex and dangerous than a long gun. Just the geometrics of a long gun, you can't accidentally shoot yourself. But with a handgun, trained professionals, even with hours and hours of training and proficiency, still have an occasional misfire or an unfortunate accident. There are a lot of dynamics that go into the use and the proper handling of a handgun, and that's what this course focuses on. I believe it would be a great step backward. We are now decriminalizing. We're essentially decriminalizing in large part the crime of illegal carrying of a weapon, because It'll be just a small percentage of the people who are guilty of that crime. And those are the people who are going to be guilty of the crime anyhow, because they are the criminals. A law-abiding citizen, by definition, is a person who, while they may not agree with every nuance of the law, they are inclined to comply, whether it's paying taxes, putting insurance on their car, or going through a legitimate, necessary teaching, learning, permitting, and renewal process. They will do that. They will do that. They will comply with that. A year ago, 3 deputies responded in Lafourche Parish to a large gathering where a physical altercation turned into one with firearms. They were probably outnumbered 200 to 1. As they were advancing towards the area where the altercation occurred, a shooter fired twice, killed 2 young women, 20 years old, one of which was 2 feet away from that officer where the splatter got on his uniform. I will always believe that that bullet was intended for that officer. He just happened to be 2 feet away, and unfortunately, this poor young lady gave her life. On January 1st of this year, a group of young students and other young people were celebrating New Year's Eve at 1:40 a.m. An altercation, physical altercation, resulted in a firearm being taken out of a car. 1 person dead, 1 person shot. The readily available access to concealed weapons not only is going to endanger the law enforcement community, it will endanger the general public as well. Now let's put aside law enforcement and the dangers to law enforcement. The simple dangers to the public at large are what concern me. I don't want to be at a Mardi Gras parade with my daughter where someone jumps up to catch a bead and that gun falls out their waistband, it hits the concrete, goes off, and innocent people get killed. I don't want to go into a department store or a restaurant and wonder who might be carrying a concealed weapon. I think we have to look at this from a broader perspective and recognize that the governor is correct. While the current structure may not be perfect, maybe some of the bureaucracy could be tweaked and adjusted, the basic foundation of the permitting process and the concealed carry training are essential to public safety. So I asked my friends and our friends in the legislature not to override this veto, to recognize that we have a good foundation, and if we need to tweak it, we can tweak it. And I want to close by saying this. You know, sometimes 1 or 2 drinks is all it takes for you to get enough courage to act as the prettiest girl in the place for a dance. I think if we have a law that allows virtually anyone to conceal carry, we're going to be ripe for a new category of George Zimmermans, people who are going to get emboldened and have this courage to confront people on minor infractions like playing their music too loud or parking in a handicapped parking zone. And with that firearm, instead of calling the police or ignoring a minor infraction that they're not trained and authorized to handle, they're going to feel brave, and they're going to walk up, and they're going to have a confrontation, and it probably won't end well. So thank you for the opportunity to express our viewpoints, and I certainly applaud the men and women who are here standing in unison in support of the governor's veto of Senate Bill 118.
Thank you, Sheriff Webre. Very well spoken. Good morning. Evening. It's my morning. I just want to join all my colleagues here today in asking the legislature to please do not override the governor's veto. My colleague and good friend Sheriff Webre has already said it all, but this is absolutely terrible bill. It's a terrible bill, not only to the men and women who wear this badge and serve the public, but it's a terrible bill for the public as well. You know, this is not in any way infringing anybody's Second Amendment rights. Those rights are intact, and we have all pledged to uphold not only the Constitution of the United States of America, but also the Constitution of the state of Louisiana, and we will do so. But this poses an exponential threat to every law enforcement officer in the state. It's hard enough for us to do our jobs without having to worry about. can you imagine going into a shooting situation and you walk in a room and everybody's holding a gun? You're not going to know who the bad guy, who's a good guy are. And it just puts those officers in a terrible position to have to make split-second decisions. And that's when some mistakes can happen, as the sheriff just mentioned. But it also poses a threat to the public. We already have an avenue if people want to conceal carry. They can do so legally. They can go apply to the state for the concealed carry permit. They can go through the training to tell them how to properly handle and care for that gun and secure that weapon. And you can do it. But this allowing just anybody that wants to carry a concealed weapon is a dangerous, dangerous bill, not only, as I said, to the men and women in law enforcement, first responders, but it also poses that same threat to our citizenry. And I'm for one, I'm just asking our friends in the legislature to please do not override this bill. I think it's that important. Anybody that knows me knows I'm a strong Second Amendment person, but I don't agree with this bill whatsoever. All I think it does is just create another stress and another possible avenue for some tragedy to happen. So I stand here with my colleagues today. I stand behind the governor's decision on vetoing this bill, and I would just ask that our legislature once again, please do not override this veto. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Chief Murphy Paul.
Deputy Chief Marlin.
Thank you. My name is Myron Daniels. I'm a Deputy Chief with the Baton Rouge Police Department, and I stand before you representing Chief Murphy Paul, as well as all of these law enforcement professionals that stand with and behind me currently. As has been stated, it is absolutely paramount that we support the governor in his decision to veto Senate Bill 118. It creates quite a bit of I guess you would call it confusion, as well as concern within law enforcement. It creates a huge safety concern, huge public safety concern when it comes to the fact of this by itself could increase violence as we know it. And you've heard some of the reasons to support that from the sheriff that spoke before me. One of the things I would just want to remind all is that there's only one standard when it comes to use of force. Currently, Louisiana requires that each law enforcement officer receive a minimum of 40 hours of firearms training to certify to carry a weapon. And again, the training that is currently required for a concealed permit is far less than that, approximately 20% of that. And with that, I would like to remind that standard, every bullet that is shot from a gun that is discharged, that standard is the same across the board. And with that, I just want to again encourage our legislators to not veto or not go against the governor's veto. In a time where we are constantly, the hot topic is surrounded around police reform. Again, this not moving forward would only create an issue that complicates law enforcement further. So short in my response, but definitely strong in my support of the governor's actions. And I ask those to support the governor throughout this process. Thank you. And I will call up the Chief of Police, Sean Ferguson from NOPD. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Chief Sean Ferguson of the New Orleans Police Department. I want to thank my colleagues for joining me in this stance with our governor. Thank our governor for his strong stance by vetoing this negligent, very negligent legislation. we have to think about what we've seen over the last year with regards to law enforcement, the microscope that we've been placed under, and how we must engage and look at how we are changing our way of policing, the constitutionality of our reforms in which we are trying to be a better public servant. But to put this occupation in a position to have to assume, and that is what we would have to do, it would put us in a position to have to assume that everyone is armed now. And in doing so, that heightens that engagement or interaction with whomever we may encounter throughout the scope of our duties. And that is something that we do not need right now. Let's think about this. Do we allow our school bus drivers to drive a school bus with our kids in them, without the proper training, without the proper knowledge, without the proper licensing? I don't think so. You know, we have to think about the smart side of this. How would this individual store this weapon? How would this individual handle this weapon? I think the sheriff said it best, especially if it is placed in a position during a parade or whatever, and it falls from their person and discharges. We have to take a position and just trust the fact that we as law enforcement professionals, we are a constitutional profession, and we know what we are doing. So the laws that are in place right now with regards to illegal carrying of a concealed firearm has truly helped us to reduce as much violent crime as we possibly can during the time in which we are seeing violent crime increase across our country. So this is just another way of taking a tool out of the toolbox, and now is not the time. Let's discuss ways in which we could possibly amend what is already in place if necessary, but I'm asking our legislators as well to please not veto our governor's veto and leave us with the tools that are needed to keep our community safe. Thank you. Fabian, anyone else behind me?
You all have any questions at all? Please go right ahead.
Has the full Sheriff's Association taken a position on this issue?
The association is neutral in its position. The sheriffs that are here gathered are the ones, and others that couldn't make the trip, that support the governor in his veto.
And on that same subject, I know I saw the Chiefs of Police Association and folks affiliated with it at the Capitol actively arguing against this legislation, but I don't feel like I saw the sheriffs there in any real capacity during session actively trying to defeat this. Did anybody talk to legislators as the bill was moving through the process to see if there was a way to stop it from getting to this point?
I didn't know the deal was going on.
I spoke to legislators who, I'm Sheriff Willie Martin, St. James Parish. I've spoken to legislators when the bill was being debated on the floor, and at those particular times, I actually had legislators tell me that they thought I was right in my position, but felt that they could not take a vote against the bill.
So what do you think will have changed now if they took that position then?
I don't know. I'm hopeful that more people are reaching out and feeling the same way we do today, and ask them to reconsider their position. Thank you.
For the chiefs of police, I spoke to Senator Morris, and he said that his local chief was in support of this. Are you finding that there's mixed reviews within law enforcement on the support of this?
I think with any legislation, and I think when the sheriff said it best earlier, with any legislation, we're, even with our law-abiding citizens, they may not necessarily agree with every legislation, but they're willing to work within the confinements of that. So you will see that, disagreement here and there, but the vast majority we are opposing. Thank you.
Is there any data from states that have legislation similar to this, where it's enacted that supports y'all's position on this? That shows that it would add to violent crime and increase problems?
I think this is all new right now, so the data has not been developed just yet.
Texas just passed
Texas just passed it, Tennessee.
Texas
well,
just
it's
passed it last year, they got
it's just
carried
started.
open but not
Or
concealed.
Arizona or
Yeah.
places like that where it's been enacted for a couple of years.
Some of them say that they have seen it, but it varies from, of course, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction within that state.
We already allow open carry here without a permit, so, I guess I'm wondering, and can somebody explain to me the distinction you see between a permit for concealed carry versus the fact we already allow open carry without a permit?
Sure. If I'm in a position where I see someone in open carry, I know that the fire.
No, microphone, sorry.
When we encounter an open carry situation, we know that a firearm is present. As a citizen or an individual, we can choose to either remove ourselves from that process if we have concerns, or as a law enforcement official, we can determine whether we think that there may be other issues for us to dig deeper in. But it puts people on notice that a firearm is present, and it allows them to be better prepared if they decide that they want to disengage, if they want to leave the situation, or if an armed confrontation were to become involved as a result of the person using the gun in an appropriate way. Police officers now can focus in on that person, whereas if everyone is concealed carry, there's no way of knowing if there's a threat and how many threats there are and the source of the threat. The law-abiding citizen, again, who goes through the process and conceals carry, can be an asset, but they can also be exposed, as we saw recently in the news, where a person engaged who was a citizen and got shot as a result after subduing the assailant. So there's that risk as well to people getting involved. But yes, and we are an open carry state, and I think for the most part, most states are open carry, but an open carry, that person is identifiable, you know that the weapon's there, you can assess whether a threat exists or not, and you can determine whether you want to intervene. You can also, if it's a person known to law enforcement, and they're known as a prohibited possessor either because of domestic violence or felony conviction or some other reason, then the officer can approach that person and take them into custody.
Now, some of the folks who were supporters of the bill, what they argued is police should already be encountering people under the expectation they might be carrying a gun because criminals wouldn't, they would have a concealed weapon. They wouldn't necessarily be open carrying for you to see. So how do you respond to that suggestion from the supporters?
There are great risks in the job that we do, and we train our officers as best we can to be alert. But the fact of the matter is, once you open up the ability of people without responsible training who are going to be negligent, and you're adding another dimension of threat to the threat that already exists. What exists is out there. When we go into a crowd of people, we assume that we may encounter danger. But when you allow an irresponsible person who's never handled a gun, who goes to a store or a gun show, buys a gun, puts it in their waistband, and then starts walking around, that is a new threat that officers are having to confront, as opposed to that same person recognizing they have to get training, they have to get knowledge about that, and they have to apply for a permitting process. I just think it adds to the threat. Yes.
With many agencies' efforts to improve or work on community policing, how do you see this bill's passage or the override maybe affecting that?
Well, the community policing concept originated in the 1990s under President Clinton in the crime bill and had great promise during that decade where crime was at exponentially high numbers. We now see a desire to return to that, but that's strictly in the talking phases right now from the federal government. The full implementation of a true community policing concept with the funding to support that is still years away. However, community engagement is always important, and when people trust police officers and engage with police officers, they're willing to share information to help make them and their community safe, and that would just be another component of that engagement and interaction.
Is it currently known roughly how many Louisianans have a concealed carry permit? Just kind of get a baseline of roughly how much concealed carry may already be happening.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't have that information off the top of my head, but state police probably has it on their website.
There are people that believe that getting the permit, that process is either too expensive or just too complicated. What are your comments on that?
I think that's a legitimate concern. I agree that there may be people who the expense is really twofold. The training expense averages about $100 to $150, depending on where you get the training. Typically, people feel like they're getting something for their money, but there may be opportunities where that could be waived for indigency or eliminated in part or reduced. The second side of that is the bureaucratic side, and that's where we get the most complaints. Quite candidly, it's another $125 or so, and the process takes a long time. It requires fingerprinting, it requires sometimes affidavits and other legal records, and so that may be an area where the legislature can look at it. I would not go on record without doing further research, but if a person is trained and gets a NICS check, the same check that you get when you go to purchase a firearm, maybe that would be sufficient for in-state concealed carry permitting purposes. And then if you want intrastate concealed carry purposes, perhaps you go to more rigorous, or maybe there's a compromise in between there. I think the bureaucratic process legitimately could be tweaked, and it should be, as most laws do over time as they mature and you encounter challenges or difficulties. I don't know how long you should have to wait for the process and how much it should cost, but the process is a legitimate process, and it's necessary for public safety and for law enforcement safety, in our opinion.
Well, we thank you for being here, and we hope that this helps us in our goal in supporting the governor, his veto of this Senate Bill 118. And we appreciate it. Thank you very much.